Ditch Mr. Bubbles and bring your little sister, because this week is going to be Bioshocking!
It's the Panthcast. With me, Sergeant Panther the Puma Man, and Daniel Things bringing up Super Best Friends clips as a personality Compton.
Howdy.
Yo, and today there's a second attempt at doing a thing where we talk about Bioshock, because we did it last week, but then because of fucking recording software, Daniel sounded like he was underwater, which, you know, would have kind of been tolerable, but like everything I said was cut off, and it sucked ass to listen to. But like, I guess I'm gonna put in a clip here of like my favorite thing we said during the podcast. Booker, are you afraid of God? No. What of you? And that just shows like Art Nouveau Elizabeth.
Or worse, they show you a better game.
Oh! Is Bioshock Infinite secretly afraid of Bioshock 2? It's secretly afraid that the Chad BDSM Eleanor fucking whipped their ass. Yeah, apart from that, last time we talked about Bioshock 2 versus Bioshock Infinite, and then that was okay. It was a bit all over the place, but I still liked how it actually came out, so it kind of made it a shame that it just sounded terrible. But yeah, this time we kind of want to do it.
Just the series.
Yeah.
Talk overall.
Yeah, let's talk about Bioshock as a series, because like I subjected myself to like a bunch of these fucking reviews of like Bioshock 1, 2, and Infinite.
And you played Burial at Sea again.
And I double-fisted Burial at Sea again. Part 1 and 2 back to back, and
got buried at sea to get retconned back into Rapture.
Yeah.
The retcon ghost, if you will. Bioshock 1.2 Birth After Sleep.
Yep. So let's start from the beginning.
Shoot.
System Shock 1! Nah, just kidding, nobody cares about System Shock, Jesus Christ. Unless you were actually alive and into PCs in the 90s, which neither Daniel nor I were.
I was alive? What are you talking about?
Yeah, but were you into System Shock? Were you into the crowd that would be now interested in talking about System Shock?
The only games I ever played on PC were fucking educational games and like Command and Conquer. That was it.
See, Daniel, that's my point. Neither of us cares about System Shock. Neither of us cares, because it's basically just like Bioshock, but way more complicated, and the fucking GUI has Tetris or whatever on it.
But really, like, what about that? What about that System Shock remake that's probably never gonna come out?
Who gives a fuck? Let's stop talking about System Shock and talk about Bioshock 1. I like Bioshock 1.
What about System Shock 2?
Let's stop talking about System Shock. I want to talk about Bioshock 1. I like Bioshock 1. Do you like Bioshock 1, Daniel?
Oh. I guess I kind of do. Got that Fontaine in it. He was a Chinaman once, too.
Talk about cultural diversity. He should have been in the Mulan remake. Oh, imagine if you did that, and it turns out he was secretly working for the British and just selling Mulan opium.
I guess the opium wars would have turned out completely different.
It would have been awesome if Mulan just ended with fucking the Boxer Rebellion, and it's like all these European armies, and then it's just like the Europeans are like, "Hey, where are the Americans?" And they just turn around and it's just Colombia.
Oh no.
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's get back to Bioshock 1. God damn it.
Going all over the place. So we brought it inconsistent as Burial at Sea.
So yeah, Bioshock 1 was a good game. It's
good game.
probably
2 levels too long.
2 levels too long.
But
2 levels too long.
It's otherwise it's an amazing game.
My thoughts were still like, because we're gonna talk about this when we talk about Bioshock Infinite and the kind of comparison between Bioshock 2 and Infinite. I think the thing that defines Bioshock 1 definitely is, hey, what is it? And I'd say it's definitely a game of that era where it's like, oh, it's a shooter, but it has a weird setting. It's kind of, to me, it kind of falls into the same kind of niche as stuff like Prey, like the original Prey with the Native Americans, where it's like weird setting, weird powers. Only Bioshock is probably the best one of that genre. Plus, it has these pseudo RPG mechanics that kind of spices things up.
Which for the time was kind of unique. Like one of the selling points was you got special ammo types, which was the thing I remember everybody talking about back then.
Fuck even for. Oh no, I'm not gonna bring it up. It's not gonna be the Fallout and Bioshock cast this time. No, it's just gonna be pure strain Bioshock. God, that's not even something Fallout 4 did. God damn it.
Mm-hmm. You thought this was a Bioshock. You thought this was a Bioshock cast, but it turns out it was a secret Fallout cast.
Fucking New Vegas did it, and everybody loved that feature. Why couldn't Fallout 4 do it?
Because shotgun is shotgun.
The shotgun is shotgun. Everything is a 12 gauge.
What size 12 gauge? It's just 12 gauge.
Once again, the comparison between, I think it's not fair to compare Bioshock as a game that's a stripped down RPG. It's definitely a shooter with RPG mechanics. It's one thing. It's a shooter with a really great story, with a linear great story.
Mm-hmm.
That just happens to have some slight RPG mechanics that you probably nowadays wouldn't even qualify as RPG mechanics. You just call them, I don't know.
Because also, don't forget it's got crafting too, which you
right.
which is something you barely use other than to construct explosive ammo.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from those slight things, I think Bioshock is still good, but it kind of is so hard to define because it comes from that era. But yeah, let's get into that when we talk about the concept of a Bioshock sequel. Bioshock 2. I still like Bioshock 2. I think Bioshock 2 is not a flawless game. I think it isn't the most fun to just outright play. Or at least when it comes to like a long-term, oh, this is how the story works, this is how the shooting arenas play out, blah, 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 that type of thing. I still think the story is good, and it's definitely from its mechanics, from a mechanical standpoint, it is fun to play. It's just that I don't like the sequence of arenas.
Mm-hmm.
Or like the order. It got a lot of flack at the time. Like Bioshock Infinite, Bioshock 1 got flack when it was around for like, oh, I still remember that shitty Yahtzee Croshaw video. Because, my fucking, sorry that I always bring it up in my videos. He's a guy that I used to respect a lot, but now it's just like, basically when it came out, he criticized it for being, well, all this thing was like lukewarm, and it was still in that era, 2007, of like, ew, I can't be positive about a thing. Because of the nostalgia critic, oh, it can't be positive about a thing because you don't like that. You want me to be this angry, pissy person, and it's like, ugh. So he just kind of said like, oh, blah blah blah. It's such a shitty RPG. It's like it's an RPG for console tards and blah blah blah. Like,
which is not to say it copies the gameplay of System Shock 2 exactly. Quite a few elements have been removed, presumably to dumb it down for the console tards. And this FPS RPG hardly has any RPG elements. Your character can use every gun and every plasmid and can hack anything he likes from the word go. The only specialization comes from equipable tonics, but you get enough slots to pretty much beef yourself up in every area. Which is not to say that it's bad, it's just shallower than was advertised. I suppose if you got the Xbox version and are used to insipid boomfests like Halo, then Bioshock will seem like the shits, but if you're a long-time PC gamer spoiled by more complex FPS RPGs, then you're in for a kick in the balls.
Like, all of the takes he did on the Bioshock series except Infinite are just terrible. Just utter garbage.
Well, you also forgot the mentality of when Bioshock came out, everyone was like, it's not as good as System Shock, or it's not as deep as System Shock, it's just a light, casual game, and that was the sentiment of the time from the old fans who remember System Shock. So that's why it got, but people who've never heard of System Shock or played it, people are like, oh wow, this is really interesting. Which me was cool because that was my first introduction to that. I was like, oh wow, that's really good. Which you should mention, Bioshock 2 was your first game in the series.
Yeah, and Bioshock 2, let's go back to that, was my first game in the series, and I think, I don't think I'm biased. I'm just saying, if this game was that shit, why the fuck would I have been returning to see Bioshock 1 and Infinite? Where would I have been so as excited as I was, and I'm still talking about Bioshock today, if Bioshock 2 sucked and made me never want to go back to that series?
Mm-hmm. I think I should bring up, because I know I feel like we're almost past it, but the thing about the Bioshock trailer, I remember the OG one, where it shows under the sea and it shows a guy attacking a little sister and then fighting a big daddy. I think what kind of stood out to me was I'd never seen anything like that at the time in like 2006 when they showed that trailer, which that was the same year they showed an OG version of what LA Noire was supposed to look like. But I digress. But anything like that, like I think at the time it's like I'd never seen anything like that with that aesthetic or its vibe. And concepts was just an interesting thing.
Yeah.
So then a few years later, I got my own money. So when Bioshock 2 came out, because I think I waited almost a year to play Bioshock because I didn't have an Xbox 360 at the time. because back then it was only a 360 exclusive, but then it got ported to everything else. But anyways, when Bioshock 2 came out, I would describe it as I liked it, but I didn't stick around, and I didn't really appreciate it until like 4 years later, where I'm like, oh wow, this is legit really good. But we'll get to that when we get to Infinite.
Yeah.
Or why I did a sudden reversal on my opinion of Bioshock 2.
Yeah, so I thought it was a good game. I thought it was a good introduction. It was kind of a... Usually I don't like series that are all jumbled up, but I think jumping into Bioshock 2 is a good starting point for the series.
Because Bioshock was such a good game, like it was such a good standalone game that the popular consensus of the time was like, "What the fuck can you even do for a sequel?" This was back then, where they were gonna make a fucking Bioshock movie with Grabinski, the guy who did Ringo and Mouse Hunt. That's back when that was still a thing. So people were like, "What the hell could a Bioshock movie or a second sequel to Bioshock?" Because I remember everyone saying it's got to be a sequel where you got to get Jack out of Rapture or something like that. So that's why when Bioshock 2 came out, I was like, oh wow, that's not what we thought it was 10 years after.
Yeah.
Or something like that. I think that was kind of a big difference. So sorry. Go on.
I think it's too far gone in the future where it's almost like fucking 1970s. And that just doesn't feel right to me. Plus like the kind of state of Rapture. I think it would have been fine if it was like 3 years later or like 2 years later. But at the same time, it made the visuals definitely different from Bioshock 1, and at least different enough, because if you had just 2 years, then it would kind of be harder to really hammer out the difference. It still builds off of like elements of like Sophia Lamb, the main antagonist from that game, is building off of Andrew Ryan, and in kind of an understandable way. From Bioshock 1, you were kind of going through all the different sections. You went through Apollo Square, you went through the apartment complex where Frank Fontaine kind of housing. You went through all this shit, but like Bioshock 2 really made you go through the like lower class
underbelly,
and that's something I still respect. I still respect it for, because like you can't really say it's better or worse, because I think Bioshock 2 is in a precarious position definitely, because it's like blah blah blah, this game is so expectations blah blah blah. But I think now that we've kind of gone away from Bioshock 1 and 2, kind of now that everything's kind of in the same, in the remastered collection, the Bioshock collection, blah blah blah, you kind of see it. You have to see it as a whole package, and I think Bioshock 2 is a decent sequel. Like it's not reinventing the wheel, but it's Last time we talked about this, I still think Bioshock 2 is the guy who does it straight laced, who does the sequel straight laced, and is good at what it is, but it's not mind blowing. It's kind of the dependable father figure. Versus Bioshock Infinite being like the big flashy guy, the Brazilian helicopter pilot from Inside Out. It's big and flashy, and it impresses you. It's kind of flashy but really shallow. Versus Bioshock 2 being just so straight laced, you don't really need to dig deeper. You can because it already lays out what it is in front of you.
It lays out everything within like 3 minutes of it opening.
Yeah. Here's
the setting. Here's the thing. Here's your objective. Go.
Yeah, but it's not the subversive of Bioshock 1, though. So it's a shitty knockoff piece of shit. That goes into the second fucking zero punctuation episode on that. Haha, it's a knockoff piece of shit, and it's like, ugh, dude, really?
So where does Bioshock 2 go? Bioshock 2 is a sophisticated satirization of the very concept of a sequel that, I'm just messing with you, it's a knockoff piece of shit.
Yeah, which I think that's so funny is now with retrospect, because everyone was like, all the criticism of Bioshock 2 was like, why are we returned to Rapture? It's not that fresh of a setting anymore. It's what can you do with it? And a lot of the consensus was like, yeah, it's you're returning to Rapture. The story's not that interesting, and that's just kind of funny. Like it feels very, nitpicky when you look at it. When Bioshock Infinite comes along, you're like, why did everybody say that about 2 again? It kind of doesn't make any sense.
Yeah,
like like I said, you basically nailed it on the head that it's a video game sequel. It's not it's not going to reinvent the wheel, but it does its job admirable. It was competent. It was designed at a time where it's like obviously the next Bioshock game is going to take a long time, so let's do a sequel to keep the series in the people's mindset. So which is why it was made to begin with.
You don't really get that anymore, do you? It's a straight up sequel that does its job fine. You just get sequels that either are going to be like, oh, this one is shit, this one is blah blah blah. This one is, at least from like my video game perspective.
Yeah, I almost want to say that the other example I could say of a video game that's like, here's a sequel, it does its job, it goes home, it's very competently made, is Evil Within 2. is a good example of like it's not reinventing the wheel. It's not as complex as the first game, but it does its job. It's competent and it's decent at what it's doing.
Once again, it's the straight-laced father figure versus the flashy fling.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to talk about Bioshock 2? Oh yeah, of course, fucking. If you actually want the fucking flashy Bioshock thing, the Bioshocky thing, then just go to Minerva's Den. To Bioshock 2 Minerva's Den, which people say, even people like us who like to defend Bioshock 2, that probably should have been the main story.
Or Mark could have been the main story of Bioshock 2. But again, think about that. You have a story that's very middle, it does its job, but the fact you got two other things that are just as good, it's not like they fall or thing. The fact that you have other content that is just as good, if not superior than the base game, which shows that there's a lot of thought was put into the sequel.
And let's explore what you meant with Mark. Basically, because I don't think people will know, Mark Meltzer from Bioshock 2 is basically, the idea is like, we have this guy in the late 60s, basically like, oh, my daughter got kidnapped by the evil Bioshock monster,
which was the ad campaign to what led into Bioshock 2. There was something beyond the sea.
It was like this little cool, not really ARG, but almost like ARG. It's still really charming to me, and honestly, like if I had to choose like what Bioshock 2 should have been, I think it should have been just split up into like 3 parts. Like one is Mark Meltzer, one is Subject Delta, and then what is the next one is Subject Sigma, or the whole Minerva's Den part.
Are you saying you want a Resident Evil 6 style Bioshock game?
I have never played Resident Evil 6.
It's basically like, oh, we got to get all the Call of Duty people. Let's make a Resident Evil game that's just Call of Duty, but with like 6 campaigns or 4 campaigns, and they might cross over one another. And it's kind of a mess.
I'm just talking about 3, or like maybe even just 2, with Minerva's Den just being a bigger episode on itself. Which
I think the great thing about Minerva's Den is that it's basically like, here's a Bioshock game, but in like 3 hours. Really, it's really short. It's very condensed, but it's to the point.
Yeah,
it starts you off. It's it's got a mystery almost through the entire game.
Yeah, that's kind of my take. Like, I think Bioshock 2 is good. I kind of wish they were doing more with that Mark Meltzer stuff, because it was really cool. Even just exploring that as only from the sides, and then getting into Minerva's End. Like, I still like my experience with Bioshock 2. It has some bullshit elements, like the big sister fights themselves are kind of bullshit, but still,
they're better than another fight in another game. So, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah. So, apart from that, do you have anything else you want to talk about both Bioshock Infinite, Bioshock 2?
Yeah, because I know right now we're just doing a real basic cover. We're not going too deep into story or anything like that for now, but I think we kind of got over it. Was, I guess, you didn't play the multiplayer, but I do remember the multiplayer briefly when it was on. And it was really fun while it lasted. It was kind of right up there with I would compare it to like Halo in terms of like, it's not like the Call of Duty game, which came out the same fucking year as Black Ops. But anyways, it's basically like you can take hits, you have a whole different loadout, plasmid. It was really fun for what it was. It's not like Call of Duty where you're one shot, you're dead. It was kind of a real fun, almost slightly in-depth RPG, not RPG, but in-depth thing with kind of its own characters and their own story, which has a really great ending to that multiplayer. When you reach the final level, it shows a cutscene where your character looks up and sees the tailplane of Jack's plane crashing into the ocean.
He must be found and eliminated. Andrew Ryan calls on each of you now to take hold of the great chain. Tonight, Rapture stands or falls by your hand.
And that's a really great little moment to tie the game in together. Otherwise, it's a really good, well-rounded game. For something that came out, that nobody really wanted, it's really good at what they did. It's a really competent sequel. Not the perfect game, but it's really good at what it does. Even, do you want to talk about the Protector trial? Did you ever play that or no?
I think I played a bit of it. I just kind of wanted to bookend this with like me saying, yeah, but it's just a knockoff piece of shit though.
Well, how about at least but the Protective Trials was better than Clash in the Clouds.
Let's talk about Bioshock Infinite.
The controversial game.
I liked it when it came out. I was really hyped for it, and it really blew my mind when Burial at Sea 1 and 2 came out, because it was like, wow, this is so cool, blah, blah, blah. Plus, I was like 14 or 15 when like a lot of that shit dropped. Actually, no, I think it was 14. And I was like really hyped for it, and it already kind of makes me feel old, realizing that it was that long ago. But I realized even at the time that it wasn't what I liked Bioshock 4, which is not only the setting, but just the way the setting was built. And I think really Bioshock Infinite has the problem of it's not built very well, neither on a story nor a world building perspective.
How about? I guess there's a way we have to go about this, because I want to say there's like 3 phases of Bioshock Infinite before we get to the main game. There's the announcement, which again, the biggest thing about Bioshock Infinite was its trailers. Everybody talked about it, but in reality, those were completely different games from a different version of the game that never came out. So you had all these expectations of like, wow, look at this. But then when the game came out, you're like, everyone was like, oh wow, this was still wow. But the consensus was like, wow, this is great, but it's not what the trailer was. But then as the years went on, you're like, wait a minute, was this ever that good to begin with?
Yeah.
Because you were so dumbstruck by how, because like I said, at the time, nobody really did this setting. That time period is such an interesting setting. The whole premise, like I said, it's what I describe as not a lot of people know about this era. So therefore, you're like, oh, what the fuck is the Boxer Rebellion? What the fuck is the Columbian World Exposition? What is this period? It was such a it was so new, so fresh. And this was also the time where the games were becoming colorful. So when Bioshock Infinite came out, people were shocked by its color palette, because this was we were coming out of the 50 Shades of Grey,
the green, gray,
generation,
brown bullshit era that kind of ended right at the tail end of Bioshock 2 when that came out. Right around. For people who don't remember, hey, fucking, how do you not remember? Fucking every game that came out in like the latter half of the 2000s and like the early 2000s were this gray-brown blobbish bullshit. That's like, ooh, that almost makes me want to talk about fucking Singularity and like all that other bullshit that came out that was like, ugh. Because like, if anything, let's just get this out of the way. I don't like Bioshock Infinite as much as I used to. However, I still like it, and at least I like every Bioshock game more than I like fucking Singularity, because Singularity was a shit game.
I never played Singularity, but I can agree to that Bioshock Infinite is an amazing game. So despite the amount of shit we talk about it, I still think what it does still has merit despite its huge cavalcade of problems. Like, I want to say the setting is the reason why I got into studying history and shit to begin with. So I still respect that series as much as I do. Same thing for fucking Bioshock. Like, that got me into listening to music from that time period. It's like, oh wow, this is stuff that I never knew existed or ever really paid attention to. So in a way, those games are really gateways to learning about the past.
Yeah.
Which goes into the Bioshock Infinite theme or cavalcade of themes.
Yeah, I personally still want to add that I didn't have the same experience as Daniel had. I actually had the thing of like, I don't think I began to really like the 50s, like that type of era, and like the Art Deco stuff because of Bioshock, but it kind of helped me go along with that designer setting and kind of get me more into learning and looking up that stuff and like, wow, this is really cool, this is really unique, this is something we haven't really seen in like, 70 years. And then when Bioshock Infinite came out, and me kind of a couple of years later talking to Daniel, it slowly over the last couple of years, last half decade, got me more into like the 1910s, along with the stuff like the Great War, the YouTube series and stuff like that. Overall, Bioshock Infinite is this flashy thing, and overall its connection to actual history, and I don't think Daniel will deny this, is very, very flimsy.
Very surface level.
Yeah, very surface level.
Like, hey, I opened up a book, I maybe read a bit of the Spark Notes, let's make a game around that. Do you think the problem with Bioshock Infinite is because you go to the thing and it says, like, yeah, we're inspired by the World Columbian Exposition, the American Exceptions, but also we're because of fucking the Occupy movement was going on at the time, which everyone thought that was going to be a big deal, which even though they're completely different philosophies and stuff like that. But like, you think them incorporating a lot of modern elements kind of ruined its own setting because it's a very specific time period that you have to kind of get right?
Yes.
Even though it does cross-dimensional shit?
I want to ask you what is the problem with Bioshock?
Which one, Bioshock or Bioshock Infinite?
Yeah, what is the problem with Bioshock Infinite? Because you said there was a problem with Bioshock Infinite.
Is it's being written from a modern perspective on a time period that you have to kind of understand why the things the way they were.
That is a valid point, but I want to ask you something. Does it matter?
Does it matter though?
Does it matter though? Because like people have been saying, let's go over to another fucking bullshit escapist old dumbass Bob Chipman who just went out and said like it subverts your expectation because it goes smaller and smaller, more to like Booker and Elizabeth, which it kind of doesn't.
Does it all hold together? Does it all make logical sense, tying up all the loose ends? Well, I'm not sure. Given the nature of these things, chances are it doesn't ultimately do any of those things, at least not completely. And I'm okay with that. In fact, I'm very okay with that, because I think the idea that the mountain of ideas and angles that the game plays with are actually a jumble given the illusion of cohesiveness might actually be their intended function, and that function is misdirection. Look at this hand, but the ball is actually in the other hand. See, what I think is going on both with this ending and with the game itself is that Bioshock Infinite is playing a sleight of hand trick in regards to people's expectations of an action game in general and a follow-up to Bioshock specifically, and I totally get why not everyone can get on board for that.
That feels like a sentiment that arises because you go back to all the material, all the interviews they talked about how it's like, oh, American exceptionalism, like they touted this is what this game's going to be about.
Yeah.
And then came the interdimensional a few years later with the 2012 demo. Then they started introducing that stuff, and it's like, oh no, this game's not about American exceptionalism, it's about terrors and Elizabeth, and they kind of broke it down, and then you're like, what the fuck is this story about again? But then when it came out, people are like, no, it's smaller. But then again, you look at it like, is this just a game that was just stitched together 1 year before development? Because clearly there's different versions of this game that existed at one point.
Yeah. When you put it that way, it just shows it in everything. Like from the character writing, which Daniel told me they brought in the fucking voice actors to kind of get the characters, to kind of hammer out the characters. But in the end, it just kind of feels, it literally feels like it's cut in half. It's just cut in half between the first half and the second half, where Elizabeth is just, I want to go to Paris, and we go to Paris, and the second half is like, no, I don't want to go to Paris, Booker, I want to kill Comstock for some reason. Which doesn't even fucking make sense, because like, if you just escaped Columbia, legal law, when they would probably disintegrate by itself.
It's something that's doomed to fail, which again, I don't know if I brought this up during the failed recording, but like to think about the Columbian Exposition.
1893, the world's Columbian Exposition, a gathering of the greatest technological feats the world had ever seen. But one exhibit stood out above the rest, the floating city of Columbia.
That thing was fucking stitched together in order to complete it in time. So it was just a bunch of metal construction, metal structures with plaster painted white. Then after the fair, all that shit started to fall apart. All the workers who worked on it started to squat in that. So the city of Chicago was like, let's just get the fire department and burn the shit down. So it was never meant to be permanent to begin with. And with Columbia, it's like, where's the actual exposition they used to make this place? It's just a bunch of buildings cobbled together, which doesn't even strike anything as the new city or the white city concept. Or was it the beautiful movements?
The City Beautiful movement?
Yeah, an inconsistent city with inconsistent platforms that just doesn't make sense as this overall city design. I think we should bring up, when you watch those trailers, Columbia still felt like an actual city despite its premise. You have big avenues, big buildings, big clusters of buildings, but when you get the main game, it's like, how the fuck does this city work again?
Yeah.
Like when you first arrive, it's like, this building will arrive at this time, and it's like, how does that work?
Yeah,
because that's the only building that I can think of that does that.
That's not even my problem with it. It's literally just like every single fucking floating island is either one singular stupid looking building, or it's just like geometry mashed into each other. It just actively goes against like any, like as I mentioned, the City Beautiful movement, which was more of a thing of like clearing up the streets, of like how reinventing street layouts and stuff like that to make it less like this shit that came about because of Industrial Revolution, like the famous Victorian slums and the brick quarters and stuff like that, and kind of really lay out cities in a planned way. Fun Columbia feels like the antithesis of that. So in itself, it kind of goes against its own time period. It goes against what the Columbian Exposition was, which I'd like to remind everyone wasn't even fucking mentioned in game once. Even though it's literally supposed to be the starting point, it's literally only mentioned in the trailers and Ken Levine interviews and stuff like that. But in the game, it's just like, oh, it just exists. Columbia just exists, and Comstock built it, maybe.
I read that book because he mentioned it. I'm like, oh wow, but they said they got a lot of information from that. I'm gonna read that book, and it's like, oh no, did they even read this book? Because everything in this book talks about why the Columbian Exposition was such a shit show to begin with, and why it was so difficult to pull off. And it's like, did they just take the name or concept only, but borrowed nothing from the book?
Which book was it? Devil in the White City?
Yeah, The Devil in the White City, which talks about it's a two topic book, which talks about the person J.H. Holmes, the person that's supposed to be killed like hundreds of people, but even though he probably killed like a few, but then it's decided with the events of the world, the Columbian Exposition, of all the political, all the financing, all the difficulties that went into designing the fair, all the problems they had, and all the hurdles they had to overcome to build that freaking fair, and why it was so difficult. And it breaks it down, and you read the game. It's like, what did they even take from this book? Because they mentioned it prominently during the interviews, and you're like, what did they just only bring it up in name only?
Yeah, but overall, let's get back to the overall thing. Bioshock Infinite feels stitched together. It gets people like us really hold up on like certain topics and like certain points, but overall, it just doesn't fit in with being a proper Bioshock game because it's not tied into it's not smart in its writing, which I think is one of the strengths of Bioshock, one of the things that make up Bioshock. It kind of knows how to work its characters, how to work its setting, which I think even Bioshock 2 did better because it's straight-laced. It's not reinventing the wheel, but I don't think that's what Bioshock needs to do, which isn't Rapture, but it's more abstract things of the writing and the character development and the world, how all of that interacts together. And it just doesn't do that, so it just ends up being worse and just feels like a fan fiction version of itself that, once again, has like this stitched together vibe.
Which I almost want to bring up the Rev interview they did with Rev Games, where Ken Levine's like, what is a Bioshock game? And he said something along the lines of like, it's a Bioshock game when you see it.
Yeah.
Which, like, what does that mean? But you look at it, it's like, it's something you look at, it's like, yep, that's a Bioshock game. And you look at Infinite, like, it's got some ideas, but is it a Bioshock game?
Because I don't think so. I don't think it's a Bioshock game because the writing is clearly all over the place, and that's more what I see when I see Bioshock Infinite. It's and that's part of what Daniel talks about. It's Bioshock Infinite doesn't know what a Bioshock game is or what makes a Bioshock game good, but that's in itself kind of good. Because we needed to have this thing of like, this is still alright, this is still fun to play, but I think we needed a shitty Bioshock game to just get to nail down what makes Bioshock good, what really knits it together.
Yeah, because one of the common criticisms of, despite all the high praise Bioshock Infinite got, it was almost near universal, where everyone's like, why are you constantly shooting everything? That was the one thing everyone kind of talked about that game, where you're just constantly shooting everything. Is there more to the story besides shooting? Because they just basically made a full-on almost FPS game where you're just constantly shooting.
Yeah.
And people were like, that's what a lot of people believed. That's where Bioshock kind of Infinite lost its identity, which they tried to amend in the DLC, which of varying quality, which we'll get to in a bit. But
yeah, so overall, we like Bioshock Infinite, but we don't like Bioshock Infinite.
It's a love-hate relationship.
I still think it gets worse when it just dimension shifts. Hey, you didn't make that arrangement with that Daisy Fitzroy, you didn't do that, and how come so much is still, like, in this universe, is there still an Elizabeth in the tower if Booker failed, and all these little things that just kind of egg you on, that shouldn't be in a well-crafted, in a competently crafted Bioshock game.
Yeah, I almost would describe as I have a love-hate relationship with the game proper, but with those trailers, there's something so magical about that, where it's like, I wish we got that, but it's so nostalgic on it to itself. In my head canon, that's its own thing that just never came out.
Weirdly enough, it's a magical world looking at the trailers. I think the trailer world and all the hints, it in itself is like, what if you got a different alternate universe version of Bioshock Infinite that wasn't as flat as Bioshock Infinite, the actual game.
Which, if you want to do a segue, how do you feel about those trailers for Burial's Devolved?
I don't care. I want to say that it embodies my main problem. One of my main problems with Bioshock Infinite as well, the base game. I think the fact that compared to the trailers, compared to all the different versions of what Bioshock could have been, we got to play the worst version. And I think we got to play the worst version of Booker.
Oh, that's not where I was gonna go with that, but yeah.
It just feels like such a natural segue that it.
No, I was gonna say, how does it feel that those trailers for Barely at Sea developed? You got into more lore about Columbia than the actual games went into about what Columbia was. Like, was those the 1970s, 80s documentary of like what was Columbia? Like a murder, a mystery, unsolved mysteries type documentary, and how those went into more detail than the games themselves. This is like some freaking Yoko Taro thing. Is like, no, if you wanted your lore, you had to make sure you saw this trailer or the radio play. That's kind of what Bioshock Infinite kind of did. It's like you got more lore from a fucking trailer,
Yeah.
fucking Kingdom Hearts tie-in trailer lore than the actual game proper.
Yeah. I already mentioned that. That's what kind of ticks me off about Bioshock Infinite. But I really want to hammer this thing in of like, I think Booker DeWitt is the worst version of himself that we could have played. Or so many characters would have been more interesting to play.
Yep.
Fucking Lady Comstock would have been more interesting to play as being this person that got murdered by her own husband and then suddenly reawoken sort of kind of as herself, but as a ghost. And then she just kind of disappears for some reason from the rest of the world. And then you have the Vox Populi version of Booker, which sounds like a more interesting version. Zachary Comstock is an interesting version of Booker. But like the Booker DeWitt that we're playing is literally the worst version of Booker DeWitt that we could have gotten. And that symbolizes the entire game for me.
Because remember the trailers, once we saw the trailers, and we saw the fucking thing where Comstock looked totally different, or there was a character named Comstock and he looked totally different. He didn't look like Booker at all. And he was basically a politician, not basically the religious Führer of fucking Columbia. He was supposed to be like in this pseudo-democracy that was around in Columbia in this stage of the game.
Well, with what just happened, you really want to take bets on what's possible? Let's go find Comstock.
Like, was the founders, because, they talk about, like, American, like, they said, the Jefferson crossed the river. Like, they kind of mention it, but they don't go into much, like, the key, the scroll, and the sword, but they just kind of dance around it, because I'm trying to remember what the hell half that ideology means, because unlike Bioshock, where you can almost quote verbatim of what the fuck Andrew Ryan was saying, or what Sophia Lamb was saying, but can you quote anything that fucking Zachary Comstock says?
Yeah.
The seed of the prophet shall sit the throne and drown in flame the mountains of man. The Lord forgives everything, but I'm just a prophet, so I don't have to.
Well, to bring it back almost to what you said about during Bioshock 2, would you think Bioshock Infinite would have been better if it had 3 character paths, where you played, here's this version of Booker, then when you die, you go, whoa, what's that? And you wake up and you play a different version of that, so it's the story progressing.
If it was more of if it full went on like story Stanley Parable like, yes, and kind of went more for a far out version of that, yes, it would have been better, I think.
Wouldn't this be better if we followed this version of Booker and then it was a whole level or something like that, rather than just hearing about it because you're like, that's way cool, I want to go see that. How much do we want to talk about the big elephant in the room?
I don't even know which elephant that is. There's so much.
Elizabeth. We can talk about how stupid Booker is and how the thing, but I think the biggest detriment to Bioshock Infinite is Elizabeth's character in general, that she's not really a good character, or like they play her up as like, the game is like, oh, you gotta save the girl from the tower, or she's her own thing, and you see the trailers and it's like, when you come down, it's like, is this really much of a character? Because you brought it up during the Underwater podcast where the whole game just falls under like, all right, let's just go from A to B, and then magic happens, and where you have to resolve this plot. So we just go to a whole new universe rather than resolving it.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about her is, like, her only motivation is like, I want to go to Paris or whatever. And the thing is, like, well, why does she want to go to Paris? Like, what is it about that is so exciting? I feel
because it's my happy place, Daniel. It's my imaginary happy place.
So, okay, while editing this, I just had a brain blast. If they were smart with this game, they would have made it so they would have rightly pointed out that she couldn't go to Paris, even if they escaped Columbia. Because people like Comstock and the people who were observing her would have known that she would immediately want to go to Paris, thus making it basically unobtainable. And isn't that kind of a much more interesting tale? I want to continue with the stream.
And we talked about how the biggest detriment to Bioshock Infinite is that Elizabeth doesn't feel like she resolves her own conflict with Comstock. how how we talked about how Booker's the one that kills Comstock. You don't really get a resolution.
I literally just stood in front of Comstock Booker, fucking manhandling Elizabeth, and the game expected me to fucking intervene, but I just kind of wanted to sit there and think about, like, what if we actually got to talk, and what if we actually had a good scene here.
Which, again, this is why I feel like we can give Bioshock 2 more credit, because despite being a simpler story, it handles its things better with the character Eleanor and how she's able to solve her own problems and her character growth because of it. She felt more like an actual character, and Elizabeth was like, oh, I'm just writing. We felt like why Eleanor at least made more sense, because she fucking did shit. She was able to escape from her own prison, while Elizabeth was like, I could pick locks, but I need somebody to do it for me. I don't know how much longer you want to keep on this, or do you want to start getting into the other big elephant in the room, which is Burial at Sea, aka Retcon Ghost, Final Fantasy style? Or better yet, let's do the segue before that. When Bioshock Infinite came out, they said, oh, get the Bioshock Season Pass. Spend $30, $20 and you'll get all this stuff. And everyone's like, okay, we'll buy it. And like almost a year passed, and we're like, so where's this stuff that you promised us? And they're like, it's coming. And then you get it via Clash in the Clouds, which is this shitty wave-based thing with stupid blue ribbons that are very vague and they're unclear. Then you get a trailer for Burial at Sea Part 1. Which, again, I feel like we had to mention Clash in the Clouds, because then I almost want to bring it up, because when I was playing through the Bioshock collection, which has then made me realize, oh yeah, maybe Bioshock 2 is a way better game than I gave it credit for, was when I was playing the Protector Trials, which, like, wow, these are actually fun. The Protector Trials, they were short, they were sweet, and they were simple, but they were fun. They're not like, oh no, I failed this level, or I failed this blue ribbon challenge. I gotta fucking do the whole thing again to redo it. But then again, I guess we can just get into Burial at Sea, which is so funny, because I feel like, because I just came off this replaying all the games just before that, and then you were kind of like, no, Bioshock Infinite or Burial at Sea is really good, or something like that. I remember we had that we were kind of conflicted at the time, or we were kind of different opinions.
But now I agree that Bioshock Infinite Burial at Sea is just kind of this short, self-congratulatory little thing that just exists, and it just kind of shows a few better things, at least in terms of mechanics. Like, ooh, like the stealth mechanic is kind of fun. It's way more fun than at least anything in the fucking base game of Bioshock Infinite. And then you have the fucking weapons wheel, Booker DeWitt, Comstock version, which is way more fun than the actual weapon handling in the base game as well.
I think that was the biggest thing when we talked during the Underwater podcast. We talked about how Burial at Sea was like, because the whole point of fucking Bioshock was like to break free of destiny, or you choose your own path. And then Burial at Sea, or even with the freaking concept of breaking the cycle, to basically shit on that its own concept and say, but no, it's destiny is destiny type nonsense, where it's like, we got to do this so Rapture can fall, and therefore the first game happens, and it's like, what are you doing again? We always bring up the thing about Burial at Sea, where it's like, what was Elizabeth's plan this entire time? I know when you were playing it, you brought that up. It's like, I'm gonna have that drill to kill Comstock, even though I'm the one who's there to kind of, fucking have this plan. But then it turns out she had no plan whatsoever.
Which is funny for a character that was supposed to have gone through, like, ooh, I'm now omniscient, basically, about all the fucking doors and see all the probabilities in all the worlds and blah blah blah, and you still get the dumb, oh no, I'm gonna get killed by a Big Daddy, which, even though I killed it, fucking just got resurrected for some reason, and then killed me with its drill arm, with which it had been attacking me for the entirety of the fucking boss fight, but now it kills me because of fucking cutscene damage.
How cutscene damage do?
Yeah.
I think that's the problem too, is because the way it feels like this is not even the same Elizabeth that we played as from the base game. It's like everything that she supposedly learned is completely retconned. I don't believe the way Burial at Sea opens up, where she's like, no, get away from me. I'm like, that doesn't sound like Elizabeth. That sounds like Elizabeth on fucking Monument Island, Battleship Bay.
Yeah.
Panicking. But by this point, she should be so nonchalant by such a thing.
Yeah, she does a way more hardcore thing to fucking Songbird, which is arguably way more... Once again, it's another thing that Bioshock Infinite recycles from Bioshock 1, which is like, hey, it kind of looks like fucking Big Daddy, right? So now we have two Big Daddies, the fucking Handyman and the Songbird. Like, that's cool, right? And then she just fucking teleports it underwater in just a blink of a second. And she's still supposed to have all of those powers, but now she doesn't anymore. And she just lets herself get killed by that fucking Big Daddy, that rando. Fucking, it's like, why? Oh yeah, because story needs to happen, because plot.
Because probably the engine can't handle it.
But all the doors.
Mm-hmm. And then we still talked about it's like what's this thing of we can't interact with ourselves type nonsense.
Yeah.
Like the whole thing about Burial at Sea 2, where it's like, but what if we run into ourselves? And like, we won't because we did it. And it's like, this isn't fucking time travel. You can just run into him and say, hey, yo, Booker, I need your help in this universe. You're going to die at the end of this. Why don't you come and help me? Like, this is such a non-problem that Elizabeth creates for herself.
Mm-hmm.
Because fate demands it.
Yeah, because the plot demands it, and we don't even know what our own mechanics are.
Do you think the reason why they killed her off is because this is such a non-problem? The story is like a fucking Looney Tunes a situation via Space Jam where this whole thing could be
well, it could have been done in 10 minutes, but because we got to have the movie, the Space Jam movie, or the fucking DLC. Just gotta have this bullshit. Yeah, it's once again that just ties into the fan fiction version of itself.
But does it matter though?
Yes, it does. If I'm supposed to care about this character, the game should respect me enough to keep this character and a power level the same, rather than artificially cuck her into just, oh no, you don't have powers anymore, fuck you. Yeah, that might have actually been a cool type of thing. That might have actually been something you would expect to be able to do as Elizabeth, but no.
I think we talked about this. Again, I'm trying to figure out why, because we had so much good content in the Underwater podcast, where we talked about how Elizabeth is like a shitty Dr. Manhattan that doesn't do jack shit with her powers.
Yep.
She literally has all the multiverse at her fingertip, but doesn't do jack shit with it.
Yep. The multiverse. Fucking all. It would have been amazing if she just ran into fucking the characters from 2.
She runs into him and Subject Delta looks at her and Eleanor goes, "Nah, don't look at that. It'll go away if you ignore her."
Just ignore these Source filmmaker characters.
And then Eleanor's like, "Wow, it's like at the end of Bioshock 2, Eleanor's like, I'm gonna go hang out with Bayonetta and Tatiana from fucking some cool characters," and Elizabeth's like, "Oh, I'm sad girl in Paris."
Yeah, I'm just sad girl in Paris, and I'm just gonna hang out with Chloe and Max from fucking Life is Shit, because that's the level of characters that we are.
That's great. Let's see, is there anything else you want to talk about that before we want to talk about anything else, or do you think you got everything you wanted?
Oh, Bioshock Infinite. I'm finished with that. I'm finished with Comstock being a shitty character that doesn't have a fucking ideology. I'm finished with the fucking Columbia being a non-threat to anyone in the 80s, actually, because it's the height of the Cold War. I'm finished talking about all of that.
Were you able to resurrect that? Because that was my favorite bit from the Underwater podcast. This is the biggest thing. I've been holding on to this for like almost 2 weeks. They never talked about how they never described how all those, like, what makes Columbia such a big threat, as they said in all their E3 interviews of Columbia is the Death Star. You're like, what the fuck does that mean? And the big reveal is like, oh no, they're destroying New York in the height of the Cold Wars in the 80s. And then in the back of your head is Columbia is about as much of a threat as the British were in that episode of South Park where they're invading the US on fucking sailboats.
Yup. But they fucking, because they'd have fucking rockets and jets and fucking radar and fucking all this bullshit that should have detected Columbia long a fucking go.
In March of 1981, a mysterious building was found high in the Alps. A building that had fallen out of the sky. What caused Columbia's secession? Where did it disappear to all those years ago? And most importantly, where is the rest of the city?
Actually, like, even if they made a bullshit of, like, no, the little test particle makes the cities invisible to radar or something bullshit like that. It's just such a dumb idea of, like, oh no, what should we do? Should we put out the big fighter jets with, like, fucking machine guns on them, fucking, like, miniguns and fucking small rockets that could fucking eviscerate.
So are you saying Columbia wouldn't make a very good song in 99 Luftballons? We also talked about, like, the big thing is, like, wouldn't that have more impact if, say, for instance, they're attacking New York in maybe, say, 1930?
Yes.
When that would have still been a threat?
Yes. She could just fucking rip apart, like, biplanes and shit like that. Imagine how awesome it would be if just Songbird was like King Kong.
I want it to be like a flight simulator that has like a level. Oh no, it's 1984. You gotta bomb the magic flying city over New York.
Columbia appearing in 1984 is like the fucking joke ending from Drakengard, where it's like, this is something that shouldn't be taken seriously, yet it's a serious plot thread in Bioshock. Where it's like, oh no, Dragon appears in modern day Tokyo, and it's immediately blown up by the fucking characters from Ace Combat.
Is this the land of the gods? It is done at
This is Bravo 1. Unidentified target has been neutralized. Over and out.
Which I don't know if we want to bring this up, but like I think we talked about this in depth in the Underwater podcast, where people say, well, Bioshock Infinite is about revision history or whatever, and it's like everything they talked about is a very mild depiction of what that actual time period was like, and it's just by modern senses like, isn't this shocking? And you're like, no.
Mm-hmm.
Racism, overzealous. And it's like there was way more shit going on in that time period than what Columbia makes you wish this is considered extreme.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Bum 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 bum. So you really like the Bioshock book cover art?
Let me send it to you. You've seen it before.
Yeah. I still think this is an awesome rendition.
That to me is like, yeah, that's what Rapture looked like in my head.
Yeah, that's so cool. Okay, second interruption, sorry. I found out that Andrew Ryan's voice actor co-wrote a Star Trek book. And it looks like this. Why has nobody talked about this? How is this real? This looks so fake. Like, this looks like something I made up. The Rule 34 Andrew Ryan book. Okay, sorry, continue. Let's talk about the Bioshock book.
I wish I could have reread it for this thing, but I listened to the audiobook like 4 years ago. That's when I started getting the audiobook, and I remember really liking it, even though it's not really canon anymore. But like, just the concept of what it did was really cool. Like, it was just, it's very, it just kind of shows how Rapture came to be. It kind of followed a lot of the characters. It showed how Frank Fontaine learned about Rapture and how he took the name Frank Fontaine and how he slowly integrated his way. He talked about Bridget Tenenbaum, and it was just a really good book. And even though it followed a series of characters, in a way you could say Bill McDonough was the main character and followed him and his family, which was a really great little tidbit. And it was just a really good book, like, for what it was, it was really good, even though they can consider it non-canon. Because I think one of my favorite bits, I feel like I'm remembering it wrong, I probably am, is the whole point of, we brought this up in the Underwater podcast, where they talked about Persephone, the prison, and how when the fucking revolution broke out, everybody escaped from Persephone rather than a stupid department store.
Stupid department store that Andrew Ryan probably wouldn't have been able to fucking contact or fucking essentially do a fucking voice chat with Elizabeth. He fucking has a camera trained on her, and he basically sees her through like a television screen and hears her basically communicating with her over fucking Discord via Wi-Fi. Because like, there's no fucking wiring to the city, right?
Not really.
Like, it's never mentioned, what the fucking department store is actually powered by, but I assume it's like local power. Or like, even then it's not the same thing as like telephone lines or like fucking CCTV down to this fucking store. Like we would have seen a cable or something.
I remember they said in the game, after the shootout, they sunk Frank Fontaine's department store into the bottom of the trench or whatever. And kind of interesting, but I'm trying to remember what they actually said. Didn't they say anything? Because you just recently played Barrel at Sea.
They rounded up everyone there. Some of the workers were still in there and they didn't get rescued or something. And maybe it had a connection via post? Via fucking pneumomail? Because it's like, oh no, all my things came back saying insufficient postage. You sick bastards. Wait, so it's connected to the rest of Rapture? Like, how? And it's like, it's such a bad fucking concept that I don't even get it at this point. Fuck, why not kill them? Why not kill them?
Because then you wouldn't have the magic savior Elizabeth to come and start this war to kill everybody. Because we got to save this one child. Because destiny is destiny. Like, that's kind of what I felt like, Barry. Let's see. Do you think it retcons from Frank Fontaine coming as this criminal mastermind to make him come out as an incompetent dumbass?
A bit.
Because how, like, in the main game, first Bioshock game, it's like Frank Fontaine's like, I sent him to a surface as, insurance policy, and then we brought him back.
Yeah, but like, Burial at Sea, put him on a plane now, and then essentially send him. Basically, we're going to put him into a plane on the surface, and then immediately send him straight back. That's how it's portrayed.
We've got the activation phrase. Now all we've got to do is get that genetic freak of nature on an airplane, and Rapture's ours!
That was one of my favorite details from the book. When Frank Fontaine supposedly killed himself, then Atlas appeared. There was a scene where Atlas is talking to a group of like workers. Bill McDonough's on the scene, and he's like, "I've known everyone from like Britain or Ireland, and like, where the fuck is this asshole from? His accent's so inconsistent." Or it's like, this guy's suspicious.
Kind of like my accent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I never read the book, but I always thought it was really interesting. I always thought getting some of the background in actual written form is kind of interesting, because I think Bioshock really, once again, I think Bioshock's strength always was the writing, as I said. So I think we should have always put the writing first.
I wish The Barrel at Sea took a cue from the book, because the book kind of has its ending is kind of what Barrel at Sea Part 2 wanted to do, where it's like, oh no, Bill McDonough wants to get his wife and child out of Rapture because he knows it's going to shit, and Andrew Ryan's more crazier, especially when they lock down the bathyspheres. So he basically makes a deal with Andrew Ryan saying that I'll give you I'll turn myself in if you let them go. And there's a whole scene, I think they're on the surface, and basically he surrenders himself over to like the guys, and then his wife and child escapes to New York or whatever, and then it cuts to them like on Fifth Avenue or whatever. And it's a really great little ending to this idea of like, that Bill McDonough has sealed his fate knowing that he's gonna die, but he's happy knowing that his wife and child will get away. It's like, that's really good. That's kind of what Barrel at Sea Part 2 tried to do. Here's a game theory for you.
Oh. Wait, sorry, Daniel. I gotta do something.
Hello, Internet!
Welcome to Game Theory, the jump of the Empire State Building of YouTube. Now go on.
Okay. You know how the little sisters gathered Adam? So Sally gathered Elizabeth Adam. Therefore, it went to the first Utopian. So technically, Eleanor is Elizabeth.
Oh shit! That's really cool. Because they all share the Adam. That means that part of Elizabeth is in Eleanor, even if it's just a really small part.
But that's just a game theory.
Fuck you. That's one of those things where I wish this was actually acknowledged in canon.
I thought that would be like, is this stupid? But then when I think about it, like, it's actually kind of cool. But nope, we can't acknowledge Bioshock 2. Can't acknowledge a game that's better than ours.
Yeah, can't acknowledge Eleanor, which is the big sister, little sister. We haven't even talked about her that much. Fucking her mother, Sophia Lamb, the antagonist of Bioshock 2, wants to use for like the snippet plot. Basically, Eleanor wants to escape, and yeah, that sets Bioshock 2 in motion.
Long story short, she's really good.
Yeah, she's really cool. Once again, she is fucking the real BDSM queen to Elizabeth's fucking 50 Shades of Grey bullshit.
Yeah. I think we were talking about yesterday, it's like fucking Eleanor is so awesome that she's a fucking summon in the final level.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, is this too much? Let me bring in Eleanor so she can solve the whole fucking thing for you. She's that powerful. Which, again, I wanted to bring up, like, how does that, like, feel? Because you talked about how Bioshock 2 shares a lot of similarities, or Infinite with Infinite, or whatever, and how the final level is literally wave-based, but yet it feels more engaging than the fucking Songbird wave-based shit at the end. It feels like it has more impact.
Fucking virgin Elizabeth versus the chat Eleanor.
Too cool.
Don't make porn. You can't. Don't make porn of her.
Don't do it. Ken Levine says, "Don't make porn, Elizabeth."
Don't make Elizabeth porn, everybody.
Don't make your source filmmaker.
Don't make Puma porn.
Get your Funko Pop Funko Pop Elizabeth porn. Go. What if the first trailer for Bioshock Infinite shows the handyman stepping on a Funko Pop?
That's amazing.
Maybe that Funko Pop was the one that Wooly threw into the sea, and it made its way to Rapture, and then it made its way to the fucking bottom of that fish tank that gets stepped on. See, it all connects.
In the meantime, I recommend that everyone throw away their retro scuba gear and pour salt on any suspicious-looking slugs. But hey, that's just a theory.
A game theory. Thanks for watching. And if you also want to jump off the Empire State Building into YouTube, then make sure to support me on Patreon. It's Join the Puma Army. I don't have a Patreon, I just really like the stupid dumb shit that every YouTuber does. Believe me, I'm gonna make a promise to everyone listening out there. I'm never gonna put a 1 minute long ad in the front of my videos, because I hate that, and also probably my intros already take up a minute. Fuck it, I don't make YouTube for money, I just make YouTube because it's fucking fun.
You don't want the Raid Shadow Legends money? Plus you forgot the most important part for an outro. You gotta press the subscribe and notification button to be part of the Puma Army.
Fucking ring the Nazi bell. The Nazi bell, Top Keksburg, UFO.
Yep, so next time you can be aware of your uploads, so you can be just as early as when you invaded Poland.
I can't tell if you literally want this to be our outro or whether or not you want to talk about something else.
I think it's a great outro.
You think it's a great outro?
Yes.
Männer von Stadt und Land, Arbeiter der Stirn und Arbeiter der Faust, sind bereit, mit ihrem Blute den Boden des Vaterlandes zu verteidigen.
Remember the Big Daddy from Bioshock? Oh, dude, his ass is so small, what the fuck?